Hi guys, I'm David and I started a blog recently and I'm going to launch a tutorial series for that so you can enjoy the things I do and have a look at how I do them. So this is the first tutorial. We are going to make a studio lighting setup for this chair so it can look great on the renders. It's a pretty basic and simple studio render, but I found very little information on the work behind images like this, so I'm going to show you my research work with it and show the uh, results I got. First, I downloaded a couple of photographs from the internet showing real photography studios or studio setups. These usually use a big white background that is curved around the corners and use different and various lights that light the scene, of course. And these are very bright lights and usually not in the shape of a simple light bulb, but a whole surface that is purely white and it reflects some nice white reflections. So these studios are usually not rounded. I found that most of them are just simply um, um, like this guitar example, but I think you can get the better result if the white plane is rounded along the x-axis as well, so it's a cylindrical shape. These are the lights I found, so you can see that they are big planes, and this is the best example that we are going to use, and we are going to copy this one. So we got a nice big stage. It's cylindrical, and we got a very bright main light source from the top, and probably we got a few other light sources that are planes on along the edges that we can see here. So let's start. We are going to make the stage first. This is going to be a simple cylinder, and we are trying to make a cylinder that is pretty big, that it and has to be pretty smooth as well. So I'm making the cylinder here. It's high, as you can see, but it's not wide enough, so I'm changing that in the channel box. The radius will be around 200 units. And of course I'm scaling this accordingly to the main object, so according to the chair. After the size is good, I'm going to make a few new subdivisions around the axis, and that will be 48 because we need nice and smooth background, and we need nice and smooth shadows, so we need a lot of polygons to work with. Now we don't need the front half of this cylinder, so I'm going to delete that along with the top half. We are not going to need that as well because the light will come from the top. So I'm making a few changes to this cylindrical shape. First, I don't really like that it's a perfect circle, so I'm making it more oval, and I'm selecting the front edges and extruding them to make a nicer shape for the whole stage. After that, the most important part is to select the corner edges and bevel them, edit mesh bevel, and make quite a few segments so it's nice and big and smooth, and there is a continuous transaction between the horizontal and the vertical lines. We don't need that much vertices, so I'm sticking here with 6 segments. After that, I deleted the unnecessary faces and made the whole thing a bit bigger. So this is looking good now, but we can see that the edges are too hard there at the corner, so we are going to simply soften the edges, normal, soften edge, and we are done with that. So the stage is built. Now what we need is position it correctly. So I'm pushing it a bit back. I'm trying to place the chair to the center, but I'm not putting too much emphasis on this. We need to set the renderer to mental ray. You can find this under Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager if you don't see the mental ray anywhere. So you can just tick the Maya 2 MR plugin to be sure you are loaded and ready to go. So the quality of the render will be a preview quality. I don't want to make it too big render times here. So the size of the render will be 640 by 400 pixels. I'm changing it here so it can be it's just a bit more pleasant to the eye. It has nothing to do with anything of the render settings. What is important, however, is to change or fix the camera view. So under View, Edit Bookmarks or Bookmarks, you can find Edit Bookmarks, and just add this new bookmark, name it Render View or anything you'd like, and close. This will save this camera position, and you can go back to this whenever you like. So this is a really great tool, and I'm making a quick preview render now without shadows, without anything. So this is the most basic render we've got, and after this we are going to start adding the environment, the textures. There is one texture. I'm adding a mental ray MIB texture. You can add Lambert or whatever you want. The important thing is to reduce the reflectivity to 0. We don't need any reflectivity on this. And the other thing is to make the whole stage white. Not completely white, because that will burn out the image later, but almost white. So I'm making a new render. It's not much of a change. It's pretty much the same, but we are starting to get where we want to be. The next step is to create the lights, and this is the most important step. I'm going to create spotlights. You can create under Create, Lights, Spotlight, or under the Rendering tab, Spotlight. And we are going to attach a plane to that spotlight directly to the beginning or the start of it. This will serve as the big planes that we saw on the photographs or images I downloaded from the net. This will help make the render more like a real studio render. We are attaching or parenting the plane to the spotlight by selecting the plane first, after that the spotlight, and hitting P on the keyboard. Now the size is an important thing. You can play around with that. It's not too important in this case. but you can resize it to whatever size you want. The spotlight won't be affected. So I'm placing this first light to the top. This is our main light. This will be the only light that casts shadows. I'm making a surface shader now, adding a surface shader and making it completely white. So this will be the white light that on the photographs you can see. You can name it whatever you want. Be sure to consistently name your objects and textures or shaders, because you are going to um, get crazy after a while. So now we are going to change the intensity of the light. We don't want to use 100% intensity because there are two other lights in the scene, so we are going to get too much light if we keep all of them at 1. So I'm using 0.8 here, and make sure to use ray trace shadows with a 1 unit light radius and 8 under shadow rays and depth. We are using area light under mental ray area light. Be sure to check that box, and and I think that's it. So we are not going to use photons, so global illumination is not an option here. We are only using final gather. Now what we need is to look through this spotlight and change the cone angle. We need a much bigger cone angle so the whole stage is lit. So we need to get basic light to the entire scene, and we are going to achieve it just placing the camera a bit off and the cone angle around 100. So we want it to be a bit to the side, either side. It doesn't really matter, just it's not too good to make shadows directly from the top, so it won't look good. Try to make a bit angle. And I also changed the penumbra angle to a unit of 20. This will make a nice soft shadow on the edges. Now I'm hitting Command D or Control D on the PC to make a new light. Be sure to select your new light, because as you can see the old one is selected right now. So select the new light and place it on the right hand side of the chair and a bit up, as I'm doing. And now we can change the settings. It can pretty much remain the same. Maybe the cone angle needs to be a bit bigger, and we don't need ray trace shadows, so no other shadows, just the main light shadows, so we don't need that one. Everything we want to keep, and the intensity is much lower, around 0.4 here. Create a new light, same method, and change the intensity to a bit lower. And this one goes to the left hand side and much lower, so you can light the object from another angle. You can also add fourth light to the back and give a nice background light to the whole scene, but I'm not going to do this in this tutorial. Now I'm back at the render view and I'm making a new render. After the render is done, you can see the difference immediately. It's much brighter, you can see the shadows, there is some black shadowing in the background, but it's starting to look good. The main difference is this is still pretty dark, so we need to change that. One thing that you can add that helps is an environment. And we are going to use HDR images to replicate the environment easily. So under render settings, indirect lighting, image-based lighting, we are creating a new light, a new HDR image. I'm using this HDR image from a CD I got with a recent issue of 3D Artist magazine. It's a really great magazine. Buy it, try it, and you'll get a lot of free stuff you can use, and it's great. So this is a pretty simple image, a studio HDR with three big white lights on the top and an empty room. It just adds nice coloration and reflections to your scene or your objects. I like to rotate it a bit so it's not parallel, because now it's pretty horizontal everything. So after a bit of rotation, I'm going to render a new scene, get back to the render view, and hit render again. In our final image you can see very little difference, but I can assure you that it's there. I don't know how visible it is, but around the seat and other parts of the chair you can see a difference, a very tiny bit difference, but it does count, especially if your object is much more reflective. My object is, I think, 0.1 intensity, so 10% reflective. That's not too much, so that counts. It's just not too visible here, but it's there. And the last thing that will make your renders really great is adding final gather. Now this will increase your render times a lot, so be sure that this is the last thing you do. After our render is done, you can definitely see that there is a lot of change. So the whole scene is just much brighter, and it just looks better. So compared to the old one, it's a huge difference, but we can still make slight adjustments to make the image look better. For example, you can see that most parts are just too bright. For example, that white part around the edges of the chair is just too burnt out. It's not clearly visible. You could keep that, but you can easily change your settings, dial down a bit the lights, and you can get a much more visible final image. So what I'm doing right now here is just quickly adjusting the intensity of the main light and the additional lights, and I will make a partial new render, um, and you can immediately see that it's better. So it's a bit darker, maybe a bit too dark, but you can play around with the settings. But it's better, it's more visible, and of course we can make adjustments in Photoshop as well. Speaking of Photoshop, this picture is not perfect yet. We need to change the background. It's just too white, so what I do is to make alpha channel, and the top part is and I cut out the top part and replace it with a white color in the bottom and a slight bluish or a slight other color that's pretty nice to me, and make a gradient, a very slight gradient, but I like to use this. It gives a variation to the render, and of course the basic post-production um, changes as well, for example adding simple ambient occlusion and such. Finally, I'd just quickly like to show you the original image I made. This is it. You can see the gradient on the top. It's slightly bluish grayish color, but I think that this tutorial made a better result. The camera angle it's better. It's the wider angle is it looks better, and but of course the texture and the resolution is much better on this one. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and cheers.